Thank you. The floor is open, so feel free to just to introduce yourself and offer brief comments. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Kunal. Thank you very much for your insights today. I think we all learned a lot about Sri Lanka's current situation in the geopolitical arena, and of course, the national healing, which I would like to inquire more about. When I was a high school student, I had the opportunity to participate as a facilitator in a youth peace conference in Sri Lanka called the Initiative for Peace, which was done with the Sri Lankan government and with an NGO called Savodia. We worked with children from all across the Sri Lankan social fabric, Tamilians, Sinhalese, Burghers, Christians, Muslims, and what have you. Quite a number of them were so traumatized by the conflict. They faced horrific abuse from all sides, that many of them had developed post-traumatic stress. And no matter how much economic assistance you would provide them, even in the post-conflict scenario, there would always just be the hatred of the other side. The fact that whatever you did, they would just be reminded of the pain and suffering. While all of you have elaborated on that there is this healing occurring right now, and definitely Sri Lanka has come a long way from the events of the 80s to the early 2000s. What other additional support do you feel the government and even society at large can provide to help heal the wounds? And will that also assist with the economic assistance? I have a sub-question related to all this. With the current FDI coming into Sri Lanka, do you feel has it helped unify, reduce the polarization of the ethnic groups, or has it increased it, maybe going to different regions instead of some others? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to come back? Okay. So we'll take a couple of more questions. Yeah, Rani at the back. Yeah.
Ronnie Mullen, I'm a visiting fellow here at ISAS. My question is about the recent political crisis, and I'm wondering what the panelists' thoughts are on whether this will drive Sri Lanka further into the Chinese arms. And with this specifically, I mean that there's been country credit downgrading at a time where Sri Lanka this year apparently has to pay back $6 billion, much of it in the first quarter. China has reportedly offered a $300 million loan with the possibility of increasing that to $1 billion. This is the first time they're offering that kind of loan. Before it's been project assistance. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are, because none of the other spheres of influence have offered that kind of money at a time where Sri Lanka needs that money. Thank you.
Roshni?
Hi, I'm Roshni from ISA. So my question is about the post-war reconciliation process. The current government, they agreed to a 15-month deadline by the UN on having different tiers of the reconciliation. That includes the Office of Missing Persons and a Truth and Reconciliation Court. So what are your thoughts about it? Because nothing much has been achieved in the last few years.
So let me start with the last question. I think nothing much has been done. This is actually what's in the global arena also, a question that has been raised that between the Sirisena and the basically Wickremesinghe government, there's not much of delivery on the reconciliation process. And well, if you look at I would look at it in two different ways, because one is that like I mentioned, the Triparas, like the reconciliation, the rehabilitation work, which we have successfully done, and the reintegration work we have successfully done, and the process on what the government has promised, no, we have failed. So, I mean, what we have sort of to work on the reconciliation processes with the international community, to bringing in, voices from outside. So that I think both I think the Sirisena and Wickremesinghe right now, what they after seeing the political sort of the divide between the two, which happened in October. And we had 2 prime ministers in 2 months' time, so you can understand the political situation right now. But we went back again and reset. But the Tamil National TNA and Sumandiran and all of them, so they do is asking for basically there's a grievance there, so it has to be addressed. While the Rajapaksa are coming in October, and the nationalist sentiments have been raised back again, and you will see that I would say there will be sort of a delay in that process, because if I sort of to project what's going to happen in the next couple of months, I don't think there will be much work in that area because of the political divisions as well as what's going on. Because by October they're going to have the presidential elections. They will have provincial elections. Now 2019 is going to be with elections, and so there will be limitations in that area on the reconciliation work. To answer your question, you raised a very important question, the 300 million to 1 billion loan. Now, the Chinese are the only, if you look at it, the largest assistance are coming from China. And if you go to Colombo, you would see the Colombo Port City development and the large amounts of Chinese infrastructure development. So recently they showed a tunnel connecting the port city and the Marine Drive, which is quite impressive in a way, because if you look at Sri Lanka's history of 70 years, we never had highways. So Chinese was the first to deliver a highway. If you look at the Colombo-Galle highway, and a lot of infrastructure that are delivered by China first to come. Now, if this tunnel is going to come, it's going to be the first again. The port city, again, first, the reclamation. The large amounts of money is pumped. That's happening. The 300 million, they have mentioned in the saying that the 300 million we are open to go up to $1 billion. And that would happen because China's interest levels, I looked at in this book basically analyzing how much interest does China has in Sri Lanka. They have huge interest. They want to, Hambantota, if you look at, there was a discussion I bring in from an Indian scholar saying that, there was Professor Swaran Singh, I've quoted him, say that what is the prospect of economic prospect when there is not much of container ships coming in, and is there a strategic reason behind it? Or are we looking at long term? How long is what are the gains to the economy? How long is the process? While a Japanese scholar questions basically if China wants to set up a military base in Hambantota, do we have the muscle to ward off the Chinese because of the amount of large assistance China has given to us? Would we have that sort of muscle in the future to sort of turn down that request? Now, I think that's the important question also. I sort of bring that to my book because while borrowing so much, and while sort of developing our infrastructure, do we have the muscle to sort of, that's a very important question raised by the Japanese scholar. So all that is at play, but then the political, the division, this division which happened in October, which is, bringing back the former president and then revisiting back again to the model that he introduced in 2015. And that gives a clear uncertainty of the Sri Lankan political sphere, and that's the reason that the country is suffering. We've suffered so much because of this instability. Now, if you look at the FDIs are quite low, and because of uncertainty in the political environment. But with that environment, China is the only country that is still coming up with the loans and assisting Sri Lanka. So that is very clear. And how the society sees is also very important, because the society, you can see a clear divide between the China camp and the Western camp. Because when this constitutional crisis happened in October, you will see the US ambassador going into parliament and tweeting, now there is democracy, right? We have restored democracy, democracy is back again. While the Chinese ambassador visits Rajapaksa. So you see that clear divide going on, and you will see this in the upcoming elections very clearly. India cleverly didn't interfere in this situation. They did not pick any side, Rajapaksa or Wickremesinghe. They were out of it. They were calling it a domestic issue. Actually, the United States should have taken that position, because they should have been out of it. Because the moment you pick somebody, you would have to support that person in the next election. So that's the future election. So there is a bit of a tricky side towards that. And to answer your question on the reconciliation and the work that you did at the Sarvodaya, yes, and that area which Vinaya Ariratna does, and he actually still continues doing that, which is amazing work. I really appreciate those work. We have to invest a lot in that particular area, especially like look at the war widows we have. There's so many. Then giving economic incentives. We are giving something from the government like once a month amount. That's not enough. Because they have been traumatized, their lives have been lost, and so we need to look at, working with government and civil organizations, and it's very important that you have that sort of nexus to, and investing in that. Because there are a lot of areas that the government does not see, which the civil organizations see, like Sarvodaya, for example, going to grassroots levels, discussing with the community, and and the amount of investment they do is a positive thing for the country. And the government needs to work more on that. And I would say the budget allocations for those from the national budget should be increased. And that is really important, because rather than, we do spend on defense and various other budgets, but then this should be a priority, a much more priority. So, okay.
Thank you. I'll just add some points to what Mr. Asanga said. With regard to the aspect about trauma, I think it is quite clear that in Sri Lanka, at least 85% people have been direct or indirect victims of the war. They have either a closer relative or a distant relative who lost their life because of the war, and that is period. And this is just very immediate. Just within 10 years, it's quite, it should be a miracle if you can completely turn over the situation. Because for instance, in my 30 years, I'm 30 plus, and in 30 years I grew up with the war, watching what is happening, and after a while it becomes something really normal, and like looking at the bomb blasts and seeing people get killed, blood, that has become completely normal for a period of time. But the problem is that I think many people have, the authority has failed to understand the importance of addressing the psychological trauma, and they are trying to address only part of the entire problem. Political issue is one part, economic issue could be another part, but while trying more, putting more resources into these two, they have to a larger extent forgotten or I would say disregarded the psychological part. They are trying bits and pieces, like trying to introduce compulsory dual language for the students so that they understand each other better. But other than that, I don't think they have done anything to improve the mental health. I strongly believe that in Sri Lanka, entire country, entire people has to be given a mental health improvement. Everyone. And about FDI polarization, yes, there is a polarization. You see that a lot of investments from India goes to the north, with a lot of investment from China are centered in the southern area. And and also I think to a certain extent, if there is a attempt by both parties to change, there will be resistance from those who are investing more in one particular area. Best example would be in North, the housing project. Chinese, according to the news reports, cabinet discussion reports, Chinese proposal was lesser than India's budget, but then India resisted, and then Sri Lanka went ahead with India for the housing project in North, because India primarily believe like their investment is like North has to be their area for investing. So these issues happen. So I think as a result, it is possible that ethnic polarization could be aggravated than what it is right now. About the political crisis, whether it will draw to Chinese arms, I think to a certain extent you can say yes. On the other hand, since 2009, there was no any other country who was investing in Sri Lanka. That is number one. And I think it is quite clear that how the World Bank and IMF stopped funding soon after the war, citing human rights violations, so on and so forth. But the other aspect is recently when Sri Lanka paid the loan dividend this time, they took the loan from IMF. They took another loan from IMF to pay the dividend. That's how they paid. And the other aspect is if you take the entire, even the bilateral loans, until 2000, as of now, the highest loans we are yet to pay is for Japan. And I think China's amount is, I cannot remember exactly the data, but recently at a discussion in Colombo, Kadirgam Institute explained that they have the official statistics they brought from the government, after putting a application for right to information, and they have taken. So I think the report is yet to come. Then I think this whole dividends about this how to which countries and which actors Sri Lanka has more debt, that could be explained. In terms of debt, I think the major concern is that what you do with the loans that you are taking. I mean, every business take loans to grow, but the problem, I think, the question that we have to ask is what we are going to do with those money that we are borrowing from different countries. Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, I can see you, please. Yeah, please introduce yourself.
My name is Gita. I have a background in policy and human rights. So my question is that in the region and internationally away as well, we've seen that when political strongmen are removed or step away, like Gayoom in the Maldives or Rajapakse in Sri Lanka, it creates a sort of vacuum within the society where people don't know how to deal with this newfound freedom of expression, etc. And it gives rise to fringe groups sometimes violently expressing themselves. We've seen it in the Maldives with the rise of religious factions, or in Sri Lanka with, again, ethnic polarization. So is this taken into cognizance? Is there a way to avoid it? Or is it just part of birth pangs for countries coming out of a turbulent past or new democracies? Thank you.
Dr. Chaudhary.
Well, okay.
Wait in the microphone.
My name is Iftikhar Chaudhary. I'm a principal research fellow at ISAS. My question would pertain to, would be derived from what Professor Raja Mohan had queried on an earlier occasion, as to what the present predilections of your system, government, parliament, etc., to Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. The whole idea is, I mean, are you intellectually persuaded that that is passé, that's you have come to a point where that is past, or is it something that that one or the other side would be still toying with? Because something that we are doing, for example, vis-a-vis India and China, I mean, broadly there is a dichotomy in which we let India and China operate in our system, China looking at taking care of the economic side, India more political security. Is there some sort of dichotomization of external interest which the Sri Lankan system is wanting to introduce? In other words, you let everybody play in Sri Lanka, but each within its own territory. Thank you. Surya.
Yeah, I'm Surya from RSIS. Earlier I was with ISAS. I just wanted to know, why is it that China is hesitant about Mattala airport operationalization, whereas it is willing to go ahead with, it has already gone ahead with Hambantota port. Do you know why China is hesitant about Mattala airport, and why is it that Sri Lankan government is considering asking India to take over the operations of the Mattala airport? And also, could you say something about the development of Trinco airport, rather the port and the economic zone? What is the progress there? Is the government still interested in that? Thank you.
Trincomalee.
Yeah, Trincomalee.
Yes, please.
Chris with German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. I have a very simple question actually in regard to the upcoming elections in India. What would it mean for Sri Lanka and for the strategic background if Modi is going to be re-elected, and what would it mean if Gandhi would win the election? Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I think she went to 4 questions.
I think if I take the first question on looking at it as a turbulent past, I wouldn't see it as a turbulent past. Number one, Rajapaksa regime had limitations, had its own issues, but then it is not a turbulent past. If you ask that question, even from the majority of Sri Lankans, it is the regime that defeated the LTT period. So, which is a strong sort of a slogan which they have attached to them, and which we had several executive presidents before Rajapaksa, which they failed. They had different mechanisms. We had the Norwegians, we had the peace deals, we had so many leaders who was assassinated. But Rajapaksa's war victory is something that I call it like you cannot take it away from him. Which no other leader against South Asia has delivered, because he has not. If you look at it, completely eradicating terrorism. If you look at even the text of terrorism, how he did it, the strategy was complete isolation of that group. Now, this is something that you have to understand, because why it cannot be applied to Afghanistan, why it cannot be, it's just impossible, because that isolation of that, what he did from the community. He isolated from the public who supported the LTT and also the community. So it's a complete isolation which gave him a clear sort of a strategy, and he adopted it and he won. But the turbulent past was because of certain incidents, which one was on corruption issues, on freedom of expression from journalists. So there was issues in it. But then again, he had elections 2 years before his term, and because he was so confident that he would get the next term, the amendment which he made on the 18th constitutional amendment, now that was wrong. I pointed out when I was at Kadirgam Institute, this cannot be done, because 2 terms for president is what is given by the constitution, and it cannot be changed to any number of times, or that's not. And bring the independent committees, such as the bribery commissions, the police commission, all under him. No, those are the mistakes which he did. probably after the war, war victory, he had, because he was projected as somebody, I would say, bigger than the person that he was, because it was the society which again built that whole image of him. And unfortunately, he moved away from those democratic practices, which actually that's the reason that he lost. So the Gayoom's case is completely different, and I would say Sri Lanka's case is completely unique. But Rajapaksa coming back, possibilities, yes, of course, because so how the society sees his recent election victory, which was the local elections, was because the society, which appointed the new government to, prosecute the corrupt, which they came, and they couldn't prosecute anyone for 3 years. So then what they thought was, look, all are kind of equal in this situation, so might as well we will go with Rajapaksa. And because this is, what Rajapaksa's economic, if you look at the delivery of his economic targets, he did deliver most of his sort of promises. And so it is not a turbulent past, but whether Sri Lanka would sort of come back, whether Sirisena is now also part of the Rajapaksa, coming to one ideology. Now, this factor, when it happened in October, I clearly mentioned that rather than the division of the center-left, it is good that the center-left is together. Because the moment the center-left is split between several individual parties, you might end up like Nepal. For example, like you might have governments every 6 months, and the instability would come into the system. And so the center-left being in again as one group, which is a good thing, I think, for the society. And on the Indian Ocean Zone for Peace, which you mentioned, I have written about it, quoting Madam Bandaranaike. The isolation of the Indian Ocean, from the external powers coming in, there was great thinking back then, and that was done at the Cold War era. But then, whether we could apply that sort of thing, because what we are saying is, having a balanced policy and having bases in Sri Lanka, no way. Our president has mentioned clearly, our prime minister has mentioned clearly, we will not allow foreign bases in our own country. So I would revisit the Indian Ocean Zone for Peace. And rather than, what happened in 1978 was Jayawardena coming in and opening it up. And when he opened up, he tied up with the United States, and which Indira Gandhi was really, so has a lot of concerns. Jayawardena. So Indian Ocean Zone for Peace was changed, the whole concept, by Jayawardena, by bringing in his relationship with President Reagan and so on, but which Indira Gandhi saw it as a serious threat. And that's why, so even at this moment, Indian Ocean Zone for Peace and promoting as a zone for peace is really important. And as a regional stabilizer, I would promote Sri Lanka as a regional stabilizer. Like Dr. Amit Dev mentioned, like, we don't have boundaries, we are an island. And we went through a war of 30 years, and then we have that, we have some sort of thing that we could offer to the entire region, maybe as a stabilizer to the region, a peace builder. So that's something that maybe Sri Lanka can capitalize slowly in the future. If it gets its institutions right and its, political policy right. So that's something that we could work on. On Trincomalee, you mentioned on Matala. Matala, what happened was, I think when China got the 99-year lease, that probably a reason, I think, for them not to sort of again bid for another operation. So that would have the entire Hambantota to the Chinese. The reason that it was given to India to look at is maybe to counterbalance the Chinese influence in the south. But still, it's on the negotiation phase. But recent development of Trincomalee was 1 week ago, which I spoke to the media, and they were asking me whether the British had an interest in Trincomalee, and whether Britain is really keen to set up a base, a military base, and this was reported in several media articles also. recently. And well, we had a problem of getting rid of the British because after 48, British went in 57. So we won independence in 48, and so 57 they left. And they remained in Trincomalee because Trincomalee is not a commercial harbor. And for me, it is a strategic harbor. I mean, you have the natural depth. It is seen as a place where submarines could sort of berth and all that. So it is a strategic port. British used it during the Second World War and all that. So, but if you look at the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and the letters exchanged between Rajiv Gandhi and President Jayawardena, they clearly mention about giving India the first priority. If we are to consider Trincomalee development, consider India first. And that still applies, I think.
Okay, about newfound freedom, I would say that Sri Lanka got its freedom in 2009 with the end of the war. And I agree with you. I think after that people are confused. And they were so united in eradicating terrorism, but I don't think they know how to deal with it after that. That's why there is so much ethnic polarization. They have forgotten the reason why the conflict began at first, and there is, because of their confusion, there is obviously concern whether this will build up into another conflict. So I think that is a concern that we have to look at it. And about dichotomization, I'm sure if we can do it, it's perfect, but whether our policymakers are thinking it in that line, I'm not so sure. And again about Mathala, I think the government will think twice before inviting China again, because I'm pretty sure that even if India does not want to invest again in Mathala or not, they would not like China investing there once again. Plus, China's investment in Hambantota had a commercial reason also, because it's the same company which has invested in the Colombo Southern Terminal, which is running really well. So they have experience of running port in Sri Lanka. So that is one of the reasons why they were ready to invest in Hambantota. So Mathala, I'm not sure whether the government will be very much enthusiastic about giving it. And Trincomalee,
the government, the Prime Minister had said that China has refused to operate Mathala. Yeah. He's on record. Rangan is on record.
I'm not so sure. I didn't see that. I'm sorry. And about Trincomalee, I think Mr. Abeyagoonasekera said what you had.
On the Indian elections,
I'll say something about after you.
I think the BJP and Congress, they've both been working with the centre-left and centre-right parties. Both parties have been sort of working, if you look at from the history. One of the reasons I bring this factor in for winning the war in 2009, this is something that I've written also. In 2009, if we didn't have Sonia Gandhi as the head up, she was the leader of the Indian party, and because there was a reason that India did not intervene in Sri Lankan when the conflict happened, and even in the last final stage also, because her husband was assassinated, and she was a direct victim. And for all that to sort of, I think that is also a factor which a lot of people don't talk about, and I think that is a serious factor, because when you have the next door, India has, there is times that India has sort of come for negotiations, intervene, but the elections that's coming up, I would say that there's elections coming in Sri Lanka also. So if I think if Modi comes or if the Congress party comes, whoever comes would work with the Colombo governments, whatever, I mean, is there. But it looks like, well, I think the BJP is during our visit, so they have some sort of, I think, a comeback. I mean, I know the recent election losses they had, but they will manage to secure, I think, but Colombo would have to work whoever comes. So.
I think some of the questions I thought, some answers. I think one on the Indian Ocean as zone of peace. Look, I'm a skeptic of multilateral UN declarations. A lot of them are feel-good kind of declarations. There was a period in the 60s and 70s when ideological declarations were made, largely only to kind of discard them in practice. I mean, but it was kind of seen as a holy scripture, Indian Ocean Zone of Peace. As you rightly said, I mean, by the time within 6 years of the passing of the resolution, you had a right-wing government which largely overturned it. Today, I think it has even less significance. That once in a while people bring it up, but if you heard what Asanga said, look, what was saying everybody should get out, all great powers should get out, we'll live happily ever after. I mean, that story is gone. I mean, that today, the strategy is actually everybody is going to be around. So how do I manage the Chinese presence? The Indians want to expand, the Americans want to come back. I didn't know that even the British want to come back into Sri Lanka. But so it's the inversion of the problem that you can't anymore merely have a declaratory statement and then hope like hell other people are listening. So they don't. So I think we are in a different dynamic where balanced policy managing the presence of multiple powers in the Indian Ocean becomes the principal strategic consideration. Second, I think on the balanced, on dichotomous thing, can you carve out spheres? One is to say, as somebody said, is Sri Lanka going to Indian sphere of influence? Certainly they don't want to be. Or is it going to the Chinese sphere of influence? Indians don't want to see that, nor do the Americans. And what you said is, look, can there be spheres of influence within a country? That can, India does the Tamil territories in the north, we'll build houses, we won't let the Chinese in there, but the Chinese will do the south. I think it's to some extent there is that sense. Foreign investment, look, you let the Indians come into the north, you let the Chinese doing in the south. But I don't think it can be sustained in that form. But I think the central problem that you posed is an important one. I think for all the countries bordering China and India, this question, look, China is a reality, second largest economic power, soon to be number one, huge amounts of cash, and the capacity to deliver development projects. But India is there. I mean, you don't want to provoke India into a political kind of a thing because India is, I mean, hegemon or not, we have intervened in the neighboring countries. That's no secret. So the fact is, how do you balance the two factors? Well, India today also wants to be an economic player, wants to give assistance. So actually, I would think at one level, it increases the leverage of the smaller countries. Every time the Chinese show up in Sri Lanka, I mean, Indians will call up and say, look, what can we do for you? So in some sense, if you play it right, you can actually get a lot more from both the powers, and then the Americans as well. So there's an advantage. I mean, I think he said about, what happened in the political crisis. The Americans and the Europeans were saying human rights, democracy, pluralism, respect for constitution, while the Chinese were saying, okay, whoever is in power, Rajapaksa, I think they miscalculated. Rajapaksa is in, therefore we'll back Rajapaksa. I think for the Indians, it was a convenient thing. It is not that we were pure. For Indians, it was, look, the Americans will do the bad cop so that India can stay neutral and still do whatever you do behind the scenes rather than in public. But I think this problem of managing the thing will remain because every internal crisis, you'll see the outside powers coming in some form. And I think that's going to be a new situation. But the danger is, on the positive side, you can take advantage of other powers' rivalries. On the dangerous side is if you mistake or if you miscalculate, the consequences can be fairly severe. Like in the case of Ukraine. Ukraine is supposed to be Russia's near abroad. Then you have the Americans in the EU who are telling the guys, look, join the EU, you'll get into NATO, we'll help you, you're part of the West now. And then suddenly Russians do something, and after that is 7 years or 8 years, and there's been no redress. So I think there is a danger that if you miscalculate and you provoke your neighbor, then the consequences could be dangerous. Similarly, something is playing out in Philippines, where this region is far more familiar. if Philippines hands over, Duterte wants to hand over Clark Air Base to the Chinese. Something similar to what's happening in Ambon. Is it a commercial project? Subic Bay, right? I mean, so Subic, yeah. So now, if that is going to be done, it's you would say, look, finally the near power is prevailing over the distant power. I mean, you could see it. But internally there will be schisms that are going to come. If you think you can get the Chinese into Subic Bay, what do the Americans do? What do the others do? So there's going to be an interesting play that's going to unfold. So, but the problem is, you have to manage today. There are more powers who constantly get involved in your domestic politics and who constantly trying to shape your political alignment, and dealing with that is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Sri Lanka. And the third question, what happens to the Indian approach to Sri Lanka? One of the things we've seen in the last 4.5 years is a strong government in Delhi that is not dependent on support from Tamil Nadu. That is, for the first time since Rajiv Gandhi, Mr. Modi has had a parliamentary majority in the Lok Sabha. So he's not frightened every time Jayalalitha or somebody made a phone call and said, look, I'll pull you down. So therefore, the leverage that the Tamil parties exercised through the coalition government's period, for example, Manmohan Singh, I mean, you're saying nice things about Sonia Gandhi, but the fact is Manmohan Singh would not even go to Sri Lanka for the Commonwealth Conference because the Tamil parties were saying you can't go. So which is like, an international conference. So it had nothing to do with the merits of the case. It was all about domestic politics. But today, I think Modi had the fortune of he could reach out to both sides. He's traveled there twice, traveled to both temples and Buddhist temples, Hindu temples, whatever he could find. So you have actually a lot more flexibility to the current Prime Minister, if you're a strong Prime Minister in India. But if tomorrow you come back to a coalition government, then I think where the Tamil Nadu, say, for 30 seats from Tamil Nadu go to one party, and they're going to define Delhi's policy toward, then we are in trouble. Not just Sri Lanka is in trouble, but more Delhi is in trouble because you can't run a foreign policy on the basis of parochial interest. But it all depends on the mathematics, the arithmetic that's going to come out of the election. So we have time for just one last question. Anybody wants to say anything, or then we can begin to close it. I think we're at the bewitching hour. If not, please, go ahead.
Hi, Ryan. So it was mentioned just now that...
Just introduce yourself.
All right. Good afternoon, I'm Ryan. It was mentioned just now that the free trade agreement between Sri Lanka and Singapore had revealed a great deal of polarization within Sri Lankan society. So I was just wondering, how would this affect how Sri Lanka approaches trade in the future?
Anybody else? Then maybe you can just go to the panel. They'll offer the last comments, whatever they have, and then we'll just bring this to a close with showing you the book. But first, Chulanee, you want to say anything? Anything, last final words on where Sri Lanka is going? Maybe instead of Crossroads, maybe we can just take one shot at predicting the future.
With regard to the question just asked, I'm not a trade expert, so I cannot comment. But overall, I would like to say that even this year, we are marking 10 years after the end of the conflict. And looking back, I think I remember after the moment I saw the news that conflict is over, and I can still remember the aspirations we had for our country. And over the 10 years, I think many things have changed. We see the opportunities, but then for some reason, it is people have failed to understand these opportunities and find the way to achieve what they want to achieve for the country. So I hope, as a Sri Lankan and someone who has seen the difficulty of war firsthand, that the authorities and people will will make a better effort in understanding the challenges and managing not just geopolitics, but mainly the domestic politics. Unless you have your house in order, I think external factors, they are not going to, managing external factors will not help. First the house in order, then the external factors.
Yeah, why don't you just say something in the trade? No, you state, then I'll go to the rest.
Look, I think I'll put it this way. The Sri Lanka-Singapore FTA is an operational trade agreement. There could be resistance to it. There could be a variety of opinions expressed on it, for it, against it. But it's a running, functional FTA. And there are many FTAs in the world which face similar resistance. This is an FTA which is a game changer for Sri Lanka, not just because of what it might produce, but also because of the fact that it marks a very significant period in Sri Lanka's external economic engagement, the first of its type. So I don't think the government is going to go back on it. I might be corrected, but I don't think the government is going to go back on it. What is important for the government is to take people on board to the extent possible. There are tweaks which are always possible. This FTA has provisions for a review. So if there are specific areas of discontent, those can always be taken up for bilateral discussion. But I don't think this is going to mark in any way a reversal in the current government and maybe all future governments' external trade policies.
So maybe just to set a final thoughts. I mean, while the Crossroads is the title of the book, I think there's good reason to be optimistic about Sri Lanka's future. I think one thing we've seen in South Asia, for all the difficulties, for all the problems that the region has had, we've also seen continuous resilience, that the countries bounce back in different form. Of course, they might take the longest possible circuitous route to come back to smart things. But the fact is, we've seen over the period countries that were once written off. I mean, if you look at the Nepal's civil war, I mean, that also went for a long time, equally brutal. But today, Nepal is in a stable situation, is beginning to make some progress. Similarly, Sri Lanka, I think, has gone through a political crisis. There are still undecided issues of political alignment, economic orientation. But my sense is the logic of the circumstance and the location itself, I mean, I think, is going to get ever more opportunities for Sri Lanka. While the internal issues have to be sorted out, my sense is that the seen over a longer period of time, I'm sure that there'll be more progress and more prosperity in Sri Lanka. So we would like you to take a look at the book. So I'm just going to pass it around to our three panelists. Maybe you can just hold it up. So just for you guys, so in this, those of you who are interested in Sri Lanka, please, the books are outside if anyone wants to pick up a copy. So let's please join me in. It's okay. Thank you. So one last thought, I mean, is really that, again, I think I want to iterate how much we're keen to work on the countries that don't get enough notice in Singapore and Southeast Asia. The growth of Bangladesh, the prospects for Sri Lanka, and the emergent openings in Nepal, I think, provide a huge possibilities, I think, for businessmen in Southeast Asia, for those who want to deal with them politically. So we hope to showcase more of the progress in South Asia, in the smaller countries, to the business people, to the policy makers, and to the other communities that are of interest to South Asia. We love to work with the Sri Lankan community here. We love to work with the Sri Lankan business people here, and we would love to work with the government, which has focused some attention on Sri Lanka. So please, whatever ideas that you have, any one of you, any of the interesting visitors that we have, we're quite happy to host from the smaller countries in ISAS, because our main mandate is to look at contemporary South Asia and where a lot has to be done with the smaller countries. So thank you for joining me here, and please join me in thanking our panelists.